Inger Stevens was a Golden Globe-winning actress whose life was riddled with dark secrets and heartbreak. No matter how much she tried to escape, the shadow of tragedy followed her at every turn, casting an eerie presence over her life until the very end. Born in Sweden, Stevens captivated audiences as the charming lead in the light-hearted TV series The Farmer's Daughter. But while she brought warmth and humor to the screen, her real life was anything but cheerful. Behind the scenes, she battled personal demons, endured ill-fated relationships, and carried the weight of an ominous fate that seemed determined to pull her under. Her childhood was not one of security or comfort. She was born Inger Stensland in October 1934 in Stockholm, Sweden, the eldest of 3 children. At first glance, one might imagine an idyllic Scandinavian upbringing, peaceful fjords, cozy winters, and a loving family. But the reality was far darker. When she was just 6 years old, her world was shattered. Her mother, Lisbeth, made an unthinkable decision. She abandoned the family, taking only her youngest son, Peter, with her. The reasons behind this act remain unknown, but it left Stevens and her other brother, Ola, in a devastating situation. The absence of their mother was just the beginning of their instability. Not long after, their father, Per, left for the United States, leaving the 2 remaining children behind in the care of their maid. If there was any hope that this arrangement would provide some stability, it was short-lived. Unable or unwilling to keep them, the maid could not be their guardian for long. Once again, Stevens and her brother were uprooted, forced to rely on relatives for shelter and care. They eventually moved in with their aunt and uncle on the small island of Lidingö, just outside Stockholm. While they finally had a place to stay, the reality of being quasi-orphans loomed over them. Their mother was gone, their father was an ocean away, and their future was uncertain. Despite his departure, their father had not completely severed ties. Years later, he made a decision that would change Stevens' life forever. He sent for his children, arranging for them to join him in the United States. In 1944, 9-year-old Stevens and her younger brother embarked on a transatlantic journey by steamship, hopeful that they would finally reunite with their father and rebuild the family they had lost. But the reunion was far from the warm homecoming they had envisioned. By the time Stevens arrived in the U.S., her father had remarried an American woman named Carol Buswell. Instead of finding comfort and stability, Stevens found herself stepping into a new household that was anything but welcoming. She quickly learned that the classic trope of the cruel stepmother wasn't just a fairy tale. It was about to become her reality. Settling in Manhattan, Kansas, Stevens and her family attempted to build a new life, but it was far from a happy one. Much like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, she quickly realized she was no longer in the Kansas she had imagined. Her teenage years were filled with constant tension, especially between her and her stepmother. Their personalities clashed, and the strict household rules only made things worse. Arguments became a regular occurrence, and Stevens felt increasingly trapped in a home that never truly felt like hers. By the time she turned 16, she had reached her breaking point. Unable to endure the suffocating atmosphere any longer, she made a bold and risky decision. She ran away. With nowhere to go and no money to her name, she ended up on the streets of Kansas City, fending for herself in a world that was far harsher than anything she had ever known. Desperate for work, she managed to land a waitressing job, scraping by just enough to survive. But it was her next gig that would change the course of her life. All throughout high school, Stevens had found solace in the performing arts, using theater as an escape from her troubled home life. It was no surprise then that when faced with hardship, she turned to the stage once more. However, this time, it wasn't a school play. She became a chorus girl in a burlesque show. The job was far from glamorous, and for someone her age, it was downright scandalous. But it gave her a sense of independence and a glimpse into a world beyond the life she had left behind. News of her new career did not sit well with her father. The thought of his teenage daughter performing in burlesque was enough to jolt him into action. Determined to bring her back home, he tracked her down and forced her to return to the family. Under strict supervision once again, Stevens reluctantly finished high school, but by then, she had already made up her mind. Her future wasn't in Kansas. After graduating, her family relocated to Texas for her father's job, but Stevens had no intention of following them. Defiant as ever, she chose to stay behind, determined to chase her dream of becoming an actress. She started off in Kansas City, working as a model and performing in fashion shows, slowly making a name for herself. But soon, the small Midwest city wasn't enough. She had her sights set on something bigger. With little more than ambition and a desire to escape, she packed her bags and set off for New York City, ready to take on the world. Unfortunately, the world wasn't quite as ready for her. Arriving in New York with big dreams but little money, Stevens took on whatever job she could find to support herself. She worked as a model, a phone operator, and a cashier while attending auditions, hoping for her big break. When she wasn't juggling these jobs, she was honing her craft, studying acting under the legendary Lee Strasberg. She also found work as a chorus girl at the Latin Quarter, a well-known nightclub. But while her dedication to the stage was undeniable, it was her relationships behind closed doors that helped open the right ones in the industry. By 1955, Stevens had started landing small roles in commercials and television, but her personal life was already becoming intertwined with her career. She developed a pattern she would repeat throughout her life, mixing work with romance. That same year, after dating her agent, Anthony Soglio, for 8 months, she agreed to marry him. Though she would later go to great lengths to bury details of their brief marriage, enough remains known to paint an unfortunate picture of their troubled union. Stevens would later describe her wedding day as the worst day of her life. Looking back, she admitted that she had married Soglio for all the wrong reasons, confessing, "He was the only person I knew in New York." The marriage, which she would later call a nightmare, fell apart almost immediately, and just 6 months later, the two divorced. But while ending the marriage was easy, getting rid of Soglio's influence over her life was another story. Though he had failed as a husband, Soglio had been a successful agent. He not only secured Stevens some of her earliest TV roles, but he also convinced her to change her last name from Stensland to the more Hollywood-friendly Stevens. However, his help came at a steep price. Even after their divorce, he continued to profit from her success, forcing her to pay him 5% of her earnings for the next 7 years. Unfortunately for Stevens, she was about to start making a lot of money. Determined to leave her past behind, she set her sights on Hollywood. The move paid off. Just 2 years after her divorce, she landed her first major film role in Man on Fire, 1957, starring alongside Bing Crosby. The film put her in the spotlight, making her a rising star practically overnight. But despite her breakthrough, audiences weren't just talking about her acting skills. Stevens' Hollywood breakthrough in Man on Fire wasn't just a career milestone. It also sparked a romance with her co-star Bing Crosby. Their chemistry wasn't limited to the screen. Behind the scenes, their relationship quickly turned into a passionate affair. Crosby, already an established Hollywood icon, was so taken with Stevens that he was reportedly ready to propose. But there was one major obstacle standing in their way. Despite their seemingly perfect match, their relationship hit an impassable roadblock: religion. Crosby, a devout Catholic, wanted Stevens to convert before marriage. She, however, refused to compromise on her beliefs. No matter how much she cared for him, She would not change her faith for anyone. Their romance came to an abrupt end, and soon after, Crosby moved on, marrying actress Katharine Grant. For Stevens, the breakup was devastating, reopening the emotional wounds she had carried for years. As if heartbreak wasn't enough, tragedy nearly struck while she was working on her next film, Cry Terror, 1958. During the intense production, Stevens found herself facing a terrifying ordeal that could have easily cost her life. While filming a scene in a subway tunnel alongside co-star Rod Steiger, something went horribly wrong. The confined space filled with carbon monoxide fumes, and before anyone realized the danger, both actors began choking. The situation escalated quickly. They were on the brink of suffocation, just breaths away from a tragic fate. Fortunately, the crew acted fast, rushing to their aid before it was too late. But while Steiger fought for his life, Stevens's reaction was far more unsettling. Years later, Steiger would reveal a chilling truth about that near-fatal incident. As crew members worked frantically to revive them, Stevens refused medical attention. She allegedly told them she didn't want to be saved. Whether it was lingering despair from her breakup with Crosby or deeper unresolved struggles, Stevens's words hinted at something far darker, an inner turmoil that no amount of fame or success could heal. Although the crew eventually convinced her to accept help, it seemed like only a temporary reprieve from the shadows that continued to haunt her. The years following her breakup with Crosby and his swift marriage to Katharine Grant were some of the darkest in Stevens's life. While her personal struggles mounted, her professional career showed no signs of slowing down. She continued to land film roles and made guest appearances on popular television series, including Bonanza. On the surface, it seemed like she was thriving. But as the 1950s came to an end, something was clearly amiss. In late 1959, just as her career seemed poised for even greater success, Stevens made an unexpected move. She stepped away from Hollywood. She left behind the bright lights of Los Angeles and relocated to New York. At first, no one thought much of it. Actors often move between coasts for work, and Stevens's decision didn't initially raise any red flags. But soon, her actions began to puzzle everyone around her. On New Year's Eve, Stevens attended a party like countless others ringing in the new decade. But when she returned home that night, something inside her seemed to break. Whatever demons she had been battling, whether lingering heartbreak, career pressures, or personal turmoil, became too much to bear. Alone in her apartment, she made a drastic and nearly fatal decision. She swallowed a handful of sleeping pills in what many believe was an attempt to take her own life. For the next 3 days, no one knew what had happened to her. When authorities finally discovered her, she was unconscious, barely clinging to life. It was later reported that she had taken not just sleeping pills but also ammonia, a combination that had devastating effects on her body. One of the most alarming symptoms was the severe swelling in her legs, so extreme that they had nearly doubled in size. But that wasn't the only damage she had suffered. By the time help arrived, she had lost her vision entirely. The toxic mix of substances had left her temporarily blind, a terrifying consequence of her actions. Yet against all odds, within a matter of weeks, she made a full recovery, physically at least. When asked about the incident, however, her explanation only deepened the mystery, leaving those around her questioning what had really been going on behind closed doors. Even years after the incident, Stevens never fully explained why she had taken such a dangerous combination of sleeping pills and ammonia. The closest she ever came to addressing it was dismissing it as one of the stupidest things she had ever done. But while she refused to elaborate, one thing was certain: this wouldn't be her closest encounter with death. Despite her near-fatal experience, Stevens wasted no time getting back to work. She quickly resumed her career, landing guest roles in a string of popular television series, including Moment of Fear, Checkmate, and Hong Kong. To outsiders, it seemed like she had moved on as if nothing had happened. However, in a bizarre and unsettling twist, one of her most famous performances would eerily foreshadow the dark fate that seemed to follow her. In 1960, Stevens starred in one of the most memorable episodes of The Twilight Zone, The Hitchhiker. She played Nan Adams, a woman driving cross-country who finds herself relentlessly pursued by a mysterious shadowy figure. As the story unfolds, she realizes the terrifying truth. The stranger stalking her is none other than death itself, waiting to claim her. The episode became a classic, but for Stevens, it carried an unsettling parallel to her real life. The darkness she portrayed on screen seemed to be mirroring the one creeping into her reality. The following year, that shadow of danger became all too real. In 1961, while traveling to Lisbon, Portugal, Stevens found herself aboard a flight that took a terrifying turn. For reasons that remain unclear, the plane was forced to make an emergency crash landing. While the incident itself was already enough to shake anyone, it was what happened next that sent a chill down Stevens's spine. Though the plane had landed roughly, it remained mostly intact, and passengers were evacuated one by one. Strangely, Stevens was the very last person to exit. Just moments after she stepped off, the aircraft suffered a sudden mechanical failure, then exploded. Had she hesitated for even a few more seconds, she would have been caught in the blast. It was another close call in a life filled with them. But while she had escaped disaster once again, both in reality and on screen, she was about to take another reckless gamble, this time with her career. 1961 was a year of near disasters and bold decisions for Stevens. After barely escaping death in the jetliner explosion, she took another major risk, one that could have ended her career just as quickly. In November of that year, she secretly traveled to Tijuana, Mexico, where she married Ike Jones, an actor, producer, and businessman. The reason their union was so scandalous? Jones was black. At the time, interracial marriages were still illegal in several U.S. states, and even where they were legal, they were met with intense scrutiny, especially in Hollywood. Both Stevens and Jones understood the harsh reality. If their marriage became public knowledge, their careers would likely be over. Faced with this impossible choice, Jones reluctantly asked Stevens to keep their relationship hidden, a request that broke his heart. Despite her love for him, Stevens agreed, but secrecy came with a price. Her past was already full of hidden truths, and this was one more skeleton in her closet. To maintain the illusion that she was single, Stevens and Jones lived almost entirely separate lives. The arrangement worked, at least professionally. With no rumors swirling about her personal life, Stevens' career continued to flourish, but what protected their reputations ultimately destroyed their marriage. The more they prioritized their public images, the more distant they became. Over time, the love that had once brought them together faded into something unrecognizable. Between 1961 and 1963, Stevens was busier than ever. Her packed schedule kept her away from Jones, but it also led to the biggest break of her career. Thanks to a string of successful television appearances, she landed the lead role in The Farmer's Daughter, a light-hearted sitcom that would define her legacy. While the show brought joy to audiences across the country, behind the scenes, Stevens' personal life was anything but cheerful. Though The Farmer's Daughter provided a comforting escape for viewers during the turbulent early 1960s, it only added to the strain on Stevens' marriage. Her demanding work schedule meant that she and Jones barely saw each other, and when they did, the time they spent together was far from happy. Tension and frustration built up over the years. and their once passionate relationship deteriorated into a series of bitter arguments. On screen, Stevens played a wholesome, carefree character, but off-screen, her life was unraveling. Behind closed doors, Stevens and Jones struggled to maintain their marriage. Though they cared for each other, their relationship was plagued by constant arguments and emotional distance. Their time together was marked by a cycle of separation and reconciliation. Weeks apart, then brief moments of reunion, only to fall back into the same pattern. Few outside their closest circle knew the extent of their struggles, but for Stevens, the weight of it all was becoming unbearable. By 1968, her personal and professional pressures collided, pushing her to the brink. While filming Madigan, Stevens reached a breaking point. According to director Don Siegel, she seemed uneasy throughout production. The film's producer, Frank Rosenberg, was known for his relentless demands, forcing Stevens into an exhausting schedule. But it wasn't just external pressure. She was notoriously hard on herself, pushing beyond her limits in pursuit of perfection. Stevens had always taken her craft seriously, sometimes to an extreme. Her commitment to acting had already earned her a Golden Globe for The Farmer's Daughter, but she often took method acting to an obsessive level. Early in her career, when preparing to play a pregnant woman, she strapped a heavy weight around her waist to fully embody the experience. And that was only the beginning. Her dedication didn't stop at physical preparation. Stevens went to great lengths to immerse herself in the role she played. When cast as a nurse, she shadowed real hospital staff in Los Angeles, even assisting them when given the chance. For a role as a baker, she spent time working in an actual bakery, determined to make her performance as authentic as possible. The line between her professional life and reality blurred constantly, a pattern that extended beyond her acting methods and into her personal relationships. One of the biggest rumors surrounding Stevens was her tendency to fall for her co-stars. Since no one publicly knew she was married, the stories of her romantic entanglements ran wild, and to a certain extent, they weren't entirely untrue. She admitted in an interview that on-set romances had a way of consuming her, explaining, "When the cruise is finished, the romance may linger, but the relationship seems to shift and change. You tell yourself you'll never fall in love that way again, but it happens." And for Stevens, it often happened with some of Hollywood's most sought-after leading men. As the strain of her secret marriage to Jones grew unbearable, Stevens found comfort in the arms of other men. While filming Five Card Stud in 1968, she grew close to her co-star Dean Martin, and the two began an affair. Details about the relationship remain unclear, as does the reason for its end. But one thing was certain: this wouldn't be her last romance with a leading man. That same year, Stevens landed a role in the western Hang 'em High, starring Clint Eastwood. Amusingly, before joining the cast, she hadn't even heard of Eastwood, who was already making a name for himself in Hollywood. But as soon as filming began, their on-screen chemistry carried over into real life, just as it often did for Stevens. While working together, Stevens and Eastwood became romantically involved, keeping their affair quiet. But unlike some of her previous flings, this one seemed to leave a lasting impression on her. After production wrapped, she told the film's director, "Anytime you do a picture with Clint and there's a part in it, call me." However, by the time she stepped onto her next film set, her heart had already moved on. In 1970, while filming Run, Simon "Run" Stevens found herself drawn to yet another leading man, Burt Reynolds. Their relationship followed the same pattern as many before it, beginning on set and quickly turning into an affair. But this time, something felt different. Stevens seemed to want more than just a fleeting romance, and her next move stunned everyone, including the man she was still technically married to. According to Jones, after rapping "Run, Simon, Run," Stevens briefly returned to their home in Los Angeles. But instead of rekindling their strained relationship, she left behind nothing but a note. In it, she explained that she needed time alone to figure things out. Then she disappeared for 10 days. When she finally resurfaced, she delivered a heartbreaking revelation. There was no saving their marriage. It had been doomed from the start, and now it was over for good. After their final conversation, Stevens made her intentions clear. She would be staying at their Woodrow Wilson house, and Jones should move to their beachside home. Heartbroken, but perhaps unsurprised, Jones agreed. However, if he had hoped this was just another one of their temporary separations, he was mistaken. This time, it was permanent, and tragically so. Despite the turmoil in her personal life, Stevens' career continued moving forward. Producer Aaron Spelling had been so impressed with her performance in Run, Simon, Run that he created a television series just for her, The Most Deadly Game. In the weeks following her split from Jones, she threw herself into promoting the show, often accompanied by Burt Reynolds. But in yet another eerie twist, Stevens was the one unknowingly playing the deadliest game of all. On the morning of April 30th, 1970, her housemate and longtime hairstylist Lola McNally walked into the kitchen and discovered a chilling sight. Stevens was sprawled on the floor, barely clinging to life. Despite how dire the situation appeared, she was still conscious. For a brief moment, she opened her eyes as if trying to say something, but no words ever came, and tragically, none ever would again. McNally immediately called for help, but unlike Stevens' previous brush with death, there would be no second chance. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. She passed away en route to the hospital. Later, the Los Angeles County coroner determined the cause of death: acute barbiturate poisoning, believed to have been self-administered. But as had happened before, Stevens left behind no clear explanation. There was, however, one clue. When authorities questioned McNally, she insisted that Stevens had seemed completely normal the night before. She had noticed nothing out of the ordinary, but this account contradicted what another close source had reported. Could this inconsistency be the key to the hidden struggles Stevens had kept locked away for so long? In her final days, the truth became even murkier. According to McNally, Stevens had told her that she and Reynolds were planning to get married, something that would have aligned with her most recent media appearances. But Reynolds reportedly told producer Aaron Spelling something entirely different. According to him, their relationship had ended long before Stevens' tragic death. Whatever the truth was, in the end, she had no one by her side. Only in death did her biggest secret finally come to light. Because she had passed without a will, someone had to step forward to manage her estate. That person was none other than Ike Jones. However, there was one major obstacle. Without any official proof of their marriage, his claim was at risk. Fortunately, one person could back up his story. Stevens' brother, Ola, who had since changed his name to Carl, came forward and confirmed the truth. Jones had indeed been her husband. The court ruled in his favor, and he vowed to donate most of Stevens' estate to the charitable causes she had cared about. But for reasons unknown, he never followed through. Still, when asked about their complicated, hidden love, Jones had only one thing to say. It was always Inger and Ike. Inger Stevens' life was filled with promise, success, and hidden sorrow. She was a woman who fought through personal demons while continuing to shine on screen, leaving behind a body of work that still captivates audiences today. Though her passing remains a tragedy, her talent and contributions to Hollywood should be remembered beyond the heartbreak of her final days. What's your favorite Inger Stevens performance? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.